My wife cheated with my brother for 8 years, but when I uncovered their money laundering scheme, I sent them both to prison and kept my daughter. I'm 36 years old. I'm a mechanical engineer, and what happened 6 months ago basically destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. I'm talking about my marriage, my family, my relationship with my brother, everything. And the thing is, I thought I had a pretty good life, you know? A decent job at a tech company in San Jose, a beautiful wife, an incredible 5-year-old daughter, nothing spectacular, but solid. Stable. Or so I thought, I guess. I should start at the beginning. When I met Victoria like 7 years ago. It was my younger brother Cameron who introduced us, which now has a completely different flavor to it, but at the time it seemed like such a thoughtful gesture on his part. We were at a tech expo in San Francisco. I was checking out some industrial equipment for work, and Cameron showed up with this incredible woman on his arm. Victoria was 27 then, worked as an event planner, and I literally was speechless when I saw her. Cameron told me, "Bro, you have to meet my friend Victoria. I think you guys would get along." And I thought he was just being nice, you know, trying to help me out because I'd been single for like a year after a failed relationship. The chemistry was instant. I'm not gonna lie. Victoria was smart, funny, had this energy that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world when she talked to you. We started dating like a week after we met, and things moved fast, really fast. At 6 months, we were already living together in my apartment in Mountain View, and by the year mark, we got engaged. Cameron was there every step of the way, being the supportive brother, helping us house hunt, giving us advice about the wedding, everything. He was even my best man, can you believe it? We got married 8 years ago in a small but beautiful ceremony in Napa Valley. Victoria looked gorgeous. I was completely in love, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest guy in the world. We bought a house in San Jose. Nothing fancy, but in a good neighborhood with good schools because we were already talking about having kids. Cameron visited us often, sometimes too often if I'm being honest, but I just thought we were a close family. My brother and I had always been close. I mean, he was 2 years younger than me, and when we were kids, I looked after him. You know what I mean? It was my responsibility as the older brother. Zoe was born 5 years ago, and it was like everything just fell into place, you know? This perfect little girl with her mother's eyes and my nose, unfortunately for her. From the start, she was an incredible kid, curious, smart, obsessed with dinosaurs, and with an explorer hat she'd wear for everything. Cameron instantly became the favorite uncle, always showing up with expensive gifts and taking her to fun places. I thought it was great that Zoe had such a present uncle in her life, especially since my parents had already passed away and Victoria's family lived on the East Coast. I started to change like 2 years ago. Though at the time, I didn't pay much attention because I was deep into a big project at work. Victoria started being more distant, always on her phone, taking calls in the other room. She started doing these girls' trips with her friends, like every 2 months, sometimes to random places like Portland or Seattle. I'd say, "Honey, isn't that a lot?" And she'd respond that she needed time for herself, that being a mom and working full-time was stressful. And I got it, honestly, or at least I thought I did. I gave her space, stayed with Zoe on the weekends she'd leave, and tried to be the understanding husband. Cameron was also super busy during that time. He worked in real estate, commercial property development, and apparently was doing really well because he was always driving new cars and talking about closing big deals. He kept visiting us, but now sometimes he'd come when I wasn't around, to help Victoria with house stuff or to take Zoe to the park. I thought, how lucky am I to have a brother like that, so involved in my family's life. God, writing that now makes me nauseous. This year, I decided to plan something special for our 7th anniversary. I know 7 years isn't like a super important milestone, but I wanted to make it memorable because I felt like Victoria and I had drifted apart a bit, and I thought it would be good to reconnect. I rented a vineyard in Sonoma, a beautiful place with incredible views, and invited like 50 people, basically all our family and close friends. I spent a fortune, honestly, but I wanted Victoria to feel special and loved. The party was on June 15th, like 6.5 months ago. Everything seemed perfect at first. Victoria looked amazing in a blue dress I'd bought her as a surprise, Zoe was running around everywhere with her damn explorer hat, showing people the leaves she found. And Cameron was there being the life of the party as always. There were toasts, music, delicious food. I remember at one point I hugged Victoria and whispered in her ear that I loved her, and she just smiled and kissed me. But her eyes weren't smiling, you know? But I was so wrapped up in my happy bubble that I didn't process it. The moment that changed everything was when Nina, Victoria's best friend since college, made a toast. Nina had never particularly liked me. I always felt like she looked at me as if I wasn't good enough for Victoria. But Victoria adored her, so I tried to get along with her. Nina stood up with her wine glass and started talking about Victoria and me, and everything sounded normal at first. You know, the typical comments about what a cute couple we were and how we supported each other. But then she said something that made me feel weird. She said, and I remember her words perfectly, Victoria has always known what she wants, and she's had Cameron as a rock throughout all these years, supporting her through difficult times. The way she said it, with this strange, little smile, and the way Victoria immediately went pale, made me feel like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water on me. But everyone else laughed and clapped like it was an innocent comment about friendship, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Cameron raised his glass and smiled, and I raised mine too. But the rest of the night, I couldn't shake this feeling of discomfort in my chest. The next morning, Victoria left early with Zoe to a children's birthday party. I was cleaning up the mess from the party the day before, still half asleep, when someone knocked on the door. It was Nina. She told me she needed to talk to me urgently, and she had this serious expression I'd never seen on her before. We went into the living room, and she took out a flash drive from her purse. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me. I asked her what it was, and she responded, "Look at them. Ethan. It's all there. I'm so sorry, but you deserve to know the truth." I'm not gonna lie, my hands were shaking when I plugged that flash drive into my laptop. The first thing that appeared was a folder full of files, like 100 easily. There were emails, photos, screenshots of text messages, and even financial records. I started opening files randomly, with no order, and with each one I opened, I felt like someone was punching me in the stomach harder and harder. There were emails between Victoria and Cameron dating back 8 years. 8 years. Before I met her. No, wait. Let me be more specific. The first emails were from before Cameron introduced her to me. There was one where she wrote to him, "Are you sure about this? Do you really think introducing me to your brother is a good idea?" And Cameron responded, "Trust me. Ethan is stable, has a good job. He'll be perfect while we continue with our plans." He literally said that. Perfect while we continue with our plans. I kept reading. I couldn't stop, even though every word was like a knife. There were photos of them, together in hotels, on trips that supposedly Victoria was taking with her girlfriends. There were messages where they planned their meetings, where they said things to each other that, no, I'm not going to repeat what they said to each other, because it literally makes me want to throw up. But the part that destroyed me the most was finding emails from when Victoria was pregnant with Zoe. Cameron wrote asking her if she was sure who the father was, and Victoria responded that it didn't matter because the timing worked out either way. Are you guys understanding me? My wife wasn't sure if my daughter was mine or my brother's. My brother. And they discussed it like it was a minor inconvenience in their plans. But wait, because it gets worse. Much worse. Among the financial documents, there was evidence that Cameron and Victoria were involved in a money laundering scheme through Cameron's real estate business. Apparently, Victoria used her event planning company as a front to move money, and Cameron laundered it through fake real estate transactions. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions. I'm not an accountant, so I didn't understand all the details, but it was clear it was illegal. I sat there for like 3 hours looking at all that evidence, feeling like my brain couldn't process it. At some point, Nina had left. I didn't even notice when. When I finally reacted, all I could think about was Zoe. Was she my daughter? Had I been raising my brother's daughter for 5 years? The very idea made me want to die. Victoria got home around 4 p.m. with Zoe. Zoe ran toward me with her hat on, yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, I found a pretty rock." and I hugged her so tight she complained. Victoria asked me if I was okay. With that fake, worried voice I could now recognize perfectly. I told Zoe to go play in her room because Daddy and Mommy needed to talk, and when Zoe went upstairs, I simply showed her the laptop with all the files open. The color drained from her face. Completely. She just stood there in the living room entrance without moving, and then started shaking her head saying, "No, no, no, no," like that was going to change anything. I asked her, very calmly, because I was at that point where you're so furious you go cold, "How long?" She started crying. Those manipulative tears she'd probably used on me thousands of times before, and said between sobs that Cameron and she had been together since college, that they loved each other, but he wasn't ready to settle down, that when they met me they thought it would be temporary, but then I proposed and she panicked and didn't know how to get out of it. I told her, "You're telling me our entire marriage, the last 7 years of my life, were a lie," and she just cried harder. I asked her about Zoe and she swore on her life, that Zoe was mine, that there had never been any doubt even though that email said otherwise. I didn't believe her, obviously. I asked her about the money, about the laundering, and there her face changed. She immediately stopped crying and said she didn't know anything about that Cameron handled all the business and she just signed papers he told her to sign. Liar. Until the end, she kept lying. I told her to leave the house. She started begging, saying she had nowhere to go, to think about Zoe, that we could go to therapy. I yelled at her. Probably the first time in my life I really yelled at someone, to get out of my house before I called the police. She left that night to a hotel, and I stayed there with Zoe, having no idea how I was going to explain to my 5-year-old daughter that her world was about to explode. The next day I went to Cameron's office. Didn't even make an appointment, just showed up. His assistant tried to stop me, but I walked straight to his office on the 15th floor of this super fancy building in downtown San Francisco. Cameron was on a call. Looked up when I walked in, and the surprise on his face was genuine. I motioned for him to end the call. When he hung up, I threw the flash drive onto his desk and told him, "Explain this to me." My brother, the guy who had been my best man, who carried my daughter on his shoulders, who had eaten dinner at my house hundreds of times, looked at me and had the nerve to smile. A small smile, like sorry but not really. He told me, "Bro, things happen this way. We didn't plan it. I mean, at first we did, but then it became real." And when I yelled at him that, real what? That for 8 years he'd been cheating on me with my wife, that possibly my daughter was his, he stood up and said very calmly that Victoria and he had history, that they truly loved each other, and that I had always been the stable option. Plan B. Plan B. He called me Plan B. I told him I was going to report him to the police, that I had evidence of his money laundering scheme, and then he did turn pale. And he tried to deny it at first, but when I told him I had all the records, he changed tactics and started saying it wasn't what it looked like, that they were legitimate investments. I told him to explain that to the authorities and walked out of his office. The first thing I did was order a paternity test. I took Zoe to the lab telling her it was a routine checkup. She was super good about it, didn't even cry when they drew blood, just asked me if we could go get ice cream after. I told her yes. We could get all the ice cream she wanted. The results would take like a week. Meanwhile, I went to the police with all the evidence Nina had given me. I'm not gonna lie, part of me felt bad about turning in my brother, but a much bigger part wanted to see him suffer. The detectives took my report very seriously, especially when they saw the amount of documentation I had. They told me they'd open an investigation and that I shouldn't contact either Victoria or Cameron in the meantime. That week was the longest of my life. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, just focused on taking care of Zoe and acting, like everything was normal for her. Victoria called and texted constantly, begging me to talk, to give her another chance. I blocked her. Cameron also tried to contact me, sending me emails saying I was overreacting, to think about family. I deleted everything without reading after the first one. The paternity test results came 6 days later. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, literally trembling, and read the important line, probability of paternity, 99.99%. Zoe was mine. My daughter was mine. I started crying right there in the middle of my living room, out of pure relief. I didn't care about anything else in that moment. All that mattered was that Zoe was my daughter. 2 weeks after the flash drive day, the police arrested Victoria. They showed up at her hotel early in the morning with a warrant. They charged her with money laundering, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Cameron was arrested the same day along with 2 of his business partners. Apparently, the investigation was bigger than I thought, and they'd already been investigating them for months. For other reasons, my evidence just accelerated things. Seeing the news about the arrests online was surreal. There was my brother in mugshot-type photos, and Victoria too, and the reports talked about a multi-million-dollar scheme that had lasted years. The prosecutor contacted me saying they were probably going to offer Victoria a deal if she cooperated and testified against Cameron, who apparently was the mastermind of everything. I filed divorce papers literally the day after Victoria's arrest. My lawyer said it was the perfect time because she was in a very weak legal position, and he was right. Victoria, from jail where she was awaiting bail, signed everything I put in front of her. Full custody for me, 0 child support from me to her, complete division of assets in my favor. She just wanted to get out of jail and focus on not going to prison for decades. The custody part was easy legally, but complicated emotionally. I had to explain to Zoe that Mommy had done bad things and was going to be away for a while. Zoe cried and asked me if it was her fault. My heart almost broke right there. I told her no, it was never her fault, that Mommy and I loved her very much, but that sometimes adults make big mistakes. I don't know if she really understood. She's 5 years old, but she clung to me and said it was okay if it was just the 2 of us. Cameron ended up being sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. He didn't go to trial. Accepted a plea deal. Victoria too, though her sentence is shorter because she cooperated, and because technically she was more of a pawn than the organizer. I think she's going to be like 3 or 4 years locked up. I'm not exactly sure. The court gave me full permanent custody of Zoe, and Victoria lost any financial rights over me or my property. It's been 6 months since the anniversary party. Since Nina gave me that flash drive. I sold the house, couldn't keep living there with all those contaminated memories. Zoe and I moved to a smaller but nicer house in Los Gatos, near the mountains. She's at a new school and seems to be adapting well, though she has hard days where she asks about her mom and her uncle Cameron. Victoria writes me letters from where she is, trying to explain herself, to ask for forgiveness. I don't read them. I keep them in case Zoe someday wants to know what happened from her mother's version. But for now, I have no interest in anything she has to say. Cameron hasn't contacted me once, which I guess is for the best, because honestly, I don't know what I'd do if I saw him. Nina and I talk from time to time. I thanked her for giving me the evidence, even though part of me hates her for waiting so long. She explained that she suspected but didn't have concrete proof until Cameron, drunk at the anniversary party, confessed everything to her and asked her to keep the secret. She felt so guilty that she spent that whole night gathering evidence from the shared accounts that Victoria and she had from their college days. I don't know if I completely believe her, but either way, she gave me the tools to get out of that lie, so I guess I owe her something. My life now is simpler, but also more honest. I work, spend time with Zoe, go to therapy twice a week, because it turns out discovering your entire life was an elaborate lie leaves you with some issues to process. I'm dating again, like very casually, nothing serious, because honestly I don't trust anyone yet. I probably won't trust anyone for a good while. Last week Zoe asked me if Mommy was going to come back someday. I told her the truth, that I didn't know, that Mommy had done things she needed to fix first. She thought about it for a moment, and then said, "It's okay, Daddy. I'm fine here with you anyway. Can I have more cookies?" And that's enough for now, I guess.